Yesterday, I found something in the locked room that made me scream so loud the birds flew out of the trees. I had been living alone in this remote cabin for 3 weeks, abandoned by my own daughter after my husband's funeral, and I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. But what I discovered behind that locked door changed everything. Now I understand why Amanda insisted so much on bringing me here, why her smile seemed forced when she left me, and why my son-in-law Brian couldn't look me in the eye. It all makes sense now, and they have no idea what's coming. A month ago, when we buried Arthur, my world collapsed. 48 years of marriage ended with a cold headstone and a pile of paperwork I didn't understand. Amanda arrived at the funeral in an elegant black dress and hugged me, whispering that everything would be all right, that she would take care of everything. I should have suspected something when I saw Brian talking on the phone in the cemetery parking lot, with that calculating expression that always gave me a bad feeling. But I was too broken by grief to pay attention to the signs. Over the following weeks, Amanda came to the house every day. She brought food, helped me with the insurance forms, and organized Arthur's documents. At first, I thought it was daughterly love, that she had finally matured and understood what it meant to be a daughter. But now, remembering those visits, I can see the truth behind every gesture. How she would check drawers when she thought I wasn't looking. How she photographed papers with her phone. How she asked questions about properties Arthur had mentioned over the years. One afternoon, as we were having tea in the kitchen, Amanda took my hands and told me she had been thinking a lot about my future, that the house was too big for me alone, that the memories would hurt me, that I needed a change of scenery to heal. She had a proposal, she said, something that would do me good. Her great-uncle had left a cabin in the country, a quiet place where I could find peace. Brian had gone to see it, and it was in perfect condition. It just needed someone to look after it. It would be temporary, she insisted, just until I felt better. I remember hesitating. The idea of being alone in an unknown place terrified me, but Amanda was very convincing. She talked about nature, fresh air, how good it would be for me to be away from the city noise. Brian nodded from the sofa, adding that the place had everything I needed, that they had left supplies, and that he would come to visit regularly. Leo, my 8-year-old grandson, ran to me and hugged me, asking me to go so I could get better soon, looking at me with those innocent little eyes. How could I say no? The day they brought me here, 3 weeks ago, I should have paid more attention to the details. Like how Brian drove fast on the dirt road, as if he wanted to get there and leave as quickly as possible. How Amanda didn't get out of the car to help me with my suitcases, just stayed in the front seat checking her phone. How neither of them wanted to come into the cabin with me, claiming they were in a hurry to get back before dark. They left me with 2 suitcases, a bag of groceries for a week, and promises that they would be back soon. Amanda kissed my forehead and told me this was what was best for me, that it would make me strong and independent again. Brian just waved from the car. I watched them drive away down the dusty road, and for the first time since Arthur's funeral, I felt completely alone in the world. The cabin was more rustic than I expected. 2 small rooms, a basic kitchen, a barely working bathroom, and that third room I found locked. The first few days, I tried calling Amanda, but there was no cell signal. I thought it was temporary, that I would soon find a way to communicate. But days passed, then weeks, and no one came. I started walking around the area, looking for neighbors or a path that would lead me to civilization. It was all woods, trees, and silence. Until yesterday, when I finally decided to force the lock on that mysterious room, what I found inside made me understand that my daughter didn't bring me here out of love. She brought me here for something much darker. The lock gave way after several attempts with a piece of wire I found in the kitchen. My hands trembled as I pushed the door open, expecting to find old furniture or dusty boxes. But what I saw took my breath away. The room was filled with perfectly organized documents, detailed property maps, geological reports, and aerial photographs. In the center of a table was a thick binder with Arthur's name handwritten on it. My heart began to pound so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I opened the binder with trembling fingers. The first documents were reports from a mining company dated 5 years ago. They spoke of gold and silver deposits in this area, specifically on the land where I now stood. The numbers were astronomical estimates of more than $2 million in extractable minerals. Arthur had been secretly negotiating with this company but had never told me anything. The last letters showed he had rejected an initial offer of $500,000, hoping to get more money. I kept reading, and the truth became clearer with every page. Arthur had died before closing the deal, but the mining rights were still valid. The property, which Amanda had told me was just a simple family cabin, was actually a literal gold mine, and my daughter knew it. Among the documents, I found copies of email conversations between Amanda and the mining company, dated just 2 weeks after Arthur's funeral. In those emails, Amanda presented herself as the rightful heir and asked about the process for selling the rights. The company replied that she needed my consent as the widow, or she would have to wait until I died to proceed with the sale. The words blurred in front of my eyes when I read Amanda's response. My mother has been very ill since my father's death. I don't think she'll last much longer. How long would the process take if she were to pass away in the coming months? I sat down on the floor of that room and cried like I hadn't cried since Arthur's funeral. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure rage. My own daughter, the child I had raised with so much love, had brought me here to die alone, abandoned, so she could collect a fortune I didn't even know existed. Every visit after the funeral, every gesture of affection, every word of comfort had been a calculated lie. I then remembered all the signs I had ignored. How Amanda had always had money problems, how Brian had lost his job 6 months ago, how they had started talking about moving to a bigger house just before Arthur got sick. I also remembered the times Amanda had asked me about wills and inheritances, always with that innocent smile that I now knew was pure performance. But there were more documents in that room. I found a satellite phone hidden in a drawer with a full battery and in perfect working order. There were also maps showing an alternate path to the main highway, a trail that Amanda and Brian obviously knew about but had never mentioned to me. There were enough provisions for months, not for the few weeks my daughter had calculated I would survive. The phone had recorded messages. With trembling hands, I played the first one. It was Arthur's voice, recorded just days before his death. "Catherine, if you're listening to this, it means something happened to me before I could tell you about the mine. Amanda knows about this place, but she doesn't know about the documents in this room. If anything happens to me, don't trust anyone until you have all the facts. The lawyer, Mr. Cole, has copies of everything. His number is in the red notebook." My husband had suspected something. He had hidden evidence and left instructions to protect me. Arthur was always shrewder than he let on, and he had apparently noticed Amanda's strange behavior before he died. The message continued. "The mining company is going to push to buy quickly and cheaply. Don't sell for less than $3 million. And Catherine, be careful with Amanda. I've seen how she looks at us when we talk about money. She's not the little girl we raised." I found the red notebook hidden behind the other documents. It had phone numbers, addresses, and detailed notes about trusted people. Mr. Cole, the lawyer, was marked as an emergency contact. There was also a number for a private investigator, and another for a journalist specializing in family fraud. Arthur had been preparing for something, creating a protective network I knew nothing about. I used the satellite phone to call Mr. Cole. He answered on the second ring, and when I said my name, he sighed in relief. "Mrs. Catherine, I've been waiting for your call since Arthur's funeral. Are you safe? Are you at the cabin?" I confirmed that I was, and he asked me not to move from there, that he would come the next day with important documents and a plan to get me out of this situation. I couldn't sleep that night. I walked through the cabin, checking every corner, finally understanding why Amanda had insisted so much that I come here. It wasn't for me to heal. It was for me to disappear. She had calculated that a 74-year-old woman, alone in the country, without communication and without transportation, wouldn't survive for long, especially if something accidental were to happen. But Amanda had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated her mother. And she didn't know that Arthur, even in his final days, had been smarter than her. Now I had all the information, all the contacts, and all the tools to completely change the game. My daughter wanted me to disappear, but what was going to disappear was her manipulative plan. At dawn, as I made coffee with steady hands for the first time in weeks, I made a decision. I was not going to be the victim in this story. I was going to be the protagonist of my own revenge. Mr. Cole arrived at exactly 10 in the morning, just as he had promised. He was a man in his 60s, with gray hair and an intelligent look that immediately reminded me of Arthur. He carried a worn leather briefcase and an expression of determination that instantly put me at ease. When he got out of his SUV and saw me at the cabin door, he shook his head and muttered something about ungrateful children. "Mrs. Catherine," he said as he approached, "Arthur spoke a great deal about you, but I never imagined we would meet under these circumstances." His voice was firm but warm, and for the first time in weeks, I felt I wasn't completely alone. I offered him coffee, and we sat at the small kitchen table, where he laid out documents that would change my life forever. "Your husband was a very forward-thinking man," the lawyer began as he organized the papers. "6 months ago, when he began to suspect Amanda's intentions, he hired me to investigate discreetly. What we discovered was worse than we imagined." He opened a folder and showed me photographs of Amanda and Brian entering and exiting the offices of the mining company on dates that coincided exactly with the days they were supposedly visiting me to grieve. The photos showed my daughter smiling, shaking hands with executives in suits, signing preliminary documents. In one of them, Brian was carrying a bottle of champagne as if they were celebrating something. The date was the day after Arthur's funeral. While I was at home crying, believing Amanda was processing her own grief, she was toasting to the future fortune she would get from my death. "But that's not all," Mr. Cole continued, pulling out another set of documents. "Amanda and Brian have been accumulating significant debt. They owe over $150,000 in credit card debt. They are 3 months behind on their mortgage, and Brian owes money to people who are not exactly forgiving of late payments." He showed me credit reports, foreclosure notices, and what looked like threatening text messages on Brian's phone. The reality hit my stomach like a punch. Amanda didn't just want me dead for the mining inheritance, she desperately needed it. Without that money, she and her family would face complete financial ruin. They had bet everything on me dying quickly and alone in this cabin, freeing them from their money problems once and for all. "Arthur asked me to prepare several protective scenarios," the lawyer explained as he poured me more coffee. "The first was to keep you safe if something like this happened. The second was to ensure that Amanda couldn't touch a cent of the inheritance if she tried to harm you. And the third," he paused dramatically, "was to ensure she would face legal consequences for elder abandonment and conspiracy to commit fraud." He then showed me Arthur's real will, not the simplified version Amanda had shown me after the funeral. In the true document, Arthur had stipulated that if I died under suspicious circumstances, or if there was evidence that Amanda had tried to hasten my death, the entire inheritance would go directly to charitable institutions. Amanda would be completely disinherited, not receiving a single dollar. "But there's more, Mr. Cole said with a smile that reminded me of a cat that had caught a mouse. "Arthur also established a trust for Leo, his grandson. If Amanda is found guilty of mistreating you, custody of the child would automatically pass to Brian's family, along with a $500,000 educational fund that she could never touch." Arthur had thought of everything. Even from the grave, he was protecting not only me, but also his innocent grandson. He had foreseen Amanda's greed and had built such a complete safety net that she had no way to win, no matter what she did. "Now comes the interesting part," Mr. Cole continued, taking out his phone. "We have enough evidence to proceed legally, but Arthur also asked me to give you the option to handle this more personally." He explained that they had installed hidden security cameras in the cabin before I arrived, documenting every day of my abandonment. They also had recordings of Amanda's phone conversations with the mining company, legally obtained through the investigation. "Amanda believes you are dying here, alone and desperate," Mr. Cole said with a calculated smile. "How about we give her exactly what she's waiting to hear?" He explained his plan. "I would call Amanda, pretending to be very sick and scared, begging her to come rescue me. When she arrived, expecting to find me weak and vulnerable, she would find me, the lawyer, the evidence, and the consequences of her actions. The idea excited me more than I wanted to admit. After weeks of feeling like a victim, I would finally have the chance to take control of the situation. But we have to be very careful," the lawyer warned. "Amanda can't suspect anything until she's here, facing the proof. If she runs or hides, the legal process will be much more complicated. We spent the rest of the day planning every detail. Mr. Cole taught me how to use a small digital recorder, explained what questions to ask to get incriminating confessions, and helped me rehearse my performance as a sick and desperate woman. He also installed additional recording equipment in the main room, ensuring every word would be legally documented. "There's something else you should know," Mr. Cole told me before leaving. "The mining company has been pushing to close the deal. They've offered up to $4 million for the full rights, and they're willing to pay an additional bonus for a quick closing." Amanda probably thinks she's just weeks away from being a millionaire. That night, alone again in the cabin, I practiced my performance in front of the mirror. I had to sound convincingly sick, scared, and desperate, but not so much that Amanda would suspect a trap. I had to find the perfect balance between the pleading and the emotional manipulation she would expect to hear. I reviewed all the documents Mr. Cole had left with me one more time. The photos of Amanda celebrating, the debt reports, the recordings of her conversations with the mining company, Arthur's real will. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of her evil plan. But what struck me most was realizing how much Arthur had truly loved me. Even sick, even dying, he had used his last strength to protect me from a daughter he had seen become a stranger. He had sacrificed his relationship with Amanda to ensure my well-being, and now it was my turn to honor that sacrifice. The next day, at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I picked up the satellite phone and dialed Amanda's number. When I heard her voice, I took a deep breath and began the most important performance of my life. "Amanda, honey," I said in a trembling voice, "I need you to come, please. I don't feel well. I think something is very wrong with me." "Mom, how did you get a phone?" "I thought there was no signal there." Amanda's voice sounded surprised, almost annoyed. I could hear music and laughter in the background, as if she were at some kind of celebration. I took a deep breath and focused on sounding as weak and desperate as possible. I found an old phone in a drawer. I lied, letting my voice crack. "Amanda, please, I think I'm dying. I haven't been able to eat for days. My whole body hurts, and I fainted in the bathroom yesterday." I paused to cough dramatically. "I'm afraid I won't be able to get out of here on my own." The silence on the other end was telling. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, calculating whether this was an opportunity or a problem. "Mom, calm down," she said finally, but her tone was cold, distant. "It's probably just stress. The change of environment can be difficult at first." "No, Amanda, this is different," I insisted, letting the real panic I had felt for weeks seep into my voice. "I think my heart is failing. Yesterday I had a horrible pain in my chest and I couldn't breathe. I lied about the symptoms, but the emotions were completely real. Please, come get me. I don't want to die alone here like Dad died in the hospital." The mention of Arthur worked perfectly. Amanda sighed, and I could hear voices whispering in the background. She was probably consulting with Brian about what to do. "Okay, Mom," she said finally. "Brian and I will come tomorrow morning. But you have to promise me you'll stay calm until we get there, okay?" "Thank you, honey," I whispered with feigned relief. "I knew you wouldn't abandon me. You're all I have left in this world." The words burned my throat, knowing how false they were, but I needed Amanda to feel safe and in control. After hanging up, I immediately called Mr. Cole to confirm the plan was in motion. "Perfect," he said. "I'll be hidden in the woods with 2 officers when they arrive. Remember, we need Amanda to talk, to confess her intentions. Ask questions that force her to admit what she's been planning." I barely slept that night. I went over and over what I would say, how I would react, what questions I would ask to get the confessions we needed. Mr. Cole had explained that we needed clear evidence of malicious intent, not just negligence. Amanda had to admit that she knew she was putting me in danger, and preferably that she had done so intentionally. At 8 the next morning, I heard the sound of a car engine approaching on the dirt road. My heart started beating rapidly, but this time it wasn't from fear, but from anticipation. I placed the recorder Mr. Cole had given me in the pocket of my dress, messed up my hair, and pinched my cheeks to look paler. Amanda and Brian entered the cabin with expressions that tried to show concern but couldn't completely hide their irritation. Amanda was wearing expensive clothes I hadn't seen before, and Brian had a new watch on his wrist. Apparently, they had already started spending money they didn't yet have, confident that my death would solve all their financial problems. "Mom, you look terrible," Amanda said, but there was something fake in her tone, as if she were reading lines from a badly written script. "How long have you been feeling like this?" She came over and touched my forehead, but her touch was cold, almost clinical. "For about a week," I moaned, sitting down heavily on the sofa. "But yesterday was the worst. I thought I was going to die here all alone." I looked directly into her eyes and added, "Why didn't you come visit like you promised? I've been waiting for you every day." Amanda exchanged a quick glance with Brian before answering. "We've been so busy, Mom. Brian got a new job, and I've been handling Dad's affairs." The lie rolled off her tongue so naturally that I wondered how many other lies she had told me over the years. "What kind of affairs?" I asked, feigning confusion. I thought we were done with all that after the funeral. This was my chance to get her to talk about the mining company and the documents she had been handling in secret. Brian shifted uncomfortably and glanced toward the door, as if he wanted to escape. Amanda, however, seemed more confident, probably thinking she was talking to a dying woman who would soon be no trouble at all. "Well, some complicated things came up about properties Dad owned," Amanda said, sitting next to me on the sofa. "Nothing you need to worry about, but it requires a lot of paperwork and meetings with lawyers." Her words were carefully chosen, but I could see the satisfaction in her eyes. "Properties? You mean this cabin?" I asked, playing dumb. I didn't know Dad had other properties. Are they worth a lot of money? It was a dangerous question, but I needed Amanda to reveal what she knew about the real value of this place. The smile that crossed Amanda's face was chilling. "Oh, Mom, don't you worry about those complicated details. The important thing is for you to be comfortable and quiet here while I take care of everything." She paused and added with false sweetness, "After all, you probably won't have to worry about these things for much longer." Her words sent a chill down my spine, but I kept my expression confused. "What do you mean by that, honey? Do you think I'm going to die soon?" It was exactly the question I needed to ask to get an incriminating response. Brian cleared his throat nervously, but Amanda seemed to be enjoying the conversation. "Mom, let's be realistic. You're 74, you just lost Dad, and now you're sick and alone in the country. People your age don't always recover from these kinds of transitions." Her tone was condescending, almost cruel. "But if I'm so sick, why don't you take me back home? Or to the hospital?" I asked, feigning panic. "I don't want to die here alone, Amanda. Please, take me with you." Amanda's mask slipped for a moment, and I could see the cold calculator behind her feigned maternal eyes. "Mom, moving you again would be very stressful for you, and hospitals are full of germs and noise. Here, you have peace, fresh air." She paused and added, "Besides, it's so far from everything. It would be very expensive and complicated to get doctors all the way out here." "Expensive for whom?" I asked, pretending not to understand. "I have health insurance and some money saved. I don't mind spending whatever it takes to get better." Brian finally spoke. "The problem is, you're in a very remote location, Mrs. Catherine. There are no hospitals nearby, and calling an ambulance out here would be complicated." His words sounded like a barely veiled threat. Amanda nodded, seemingly satisfied with her husband's answer. "Exactly. And honestly, Mom, I think it's best for you to stay here, resting, until nature takes its course." The phrase was said with a smile, but her eyes were as cold as ice. At that moment, I heard footsteps on the porch outside. Mr. Cole had arrived exactly on time, just as we had planned. Amanda and Brian hadn't heard anything yet, too focused on their inadvertent confession. "You know what, Amanda?" I said, straightening up slowly on the sofa. "I think you're right. Nature should take its course." My voice changed completely, losing all its feigned weakness. "But I'm not talking about my death. I'm talking about justice." Amanda's expression shifted instantly from satisfaction to confusion, and then to something that looked dangerously like fear. The cabin door opened at that exact moment, and Mr. Cole entered, followed by 2 police officers. Amanda jumped from the sofa as if she'd been electrocuted, and Brian stumbled backward until he hit the wall. The look of absolute shock on their faces would have been comical if not for the gravity of the situation. What? What is happening here? Amanda stammered, looking between Mr. Cole, the officers, and me. Her voice had lost all the condescending confidence from moments before. Who are you? How did you get here? I'm Mr. Cole, Arthur's attorney and now the legal representative for Mrs. Catherine, Mr. Cole said in a firm voice, placing his briefcase on the table. And these are Officers Garcia and Morales, who have been listening to your conversation from outside for the last 20 minutes. Brian tried to move toward the door, but Officer Garcia held up a hand to stop him. Nobody is leaving here until we've cleared a few things up, he said with authority. Please, sit down. Amanda looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. It was a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and something that looked like pure terror. Mom, what is all this? Why are the police here? I thought you were sick. Oh, I'm very sick, Amanda, I replied, slowly getting to my feet. I'm sick of the lies, sick of the manipulation, and especially sick of discovering that my own daughter wanted me to die so she could collect an inheritance. I took the recorder out of my pocket and placed it on the table. But what makes me sickest is knowing that this was all planned from the moment we buried your father. Mr. Cole opened his briefcase and began to pull out documents, spreading them on the table like cards in a poker game. Miss Amanda, do you recognize these documents? They are preliminary contracts with North Star Minerals, dated 3 days after your father's funeral. Amanda looked at the papers and her face lost all its color. I don't know what you're talking about, she lied, but her voice trembled noticeably. Really? I asked, picking up one of the photographs Mr. Cole had shown me the day before. Then this isn't you toasting with champagne in the mining company's offices? I showed her the picture of herself smiling with a glass in her hand, standing next to men in suits. Because it was taken the day after your father's funeral, while I was at home crying, believing you were in mourning. Brian finally found his voice. This is a setup. You can't prove anything. Amanda was just exploring options for the family's future. Options that included my death? I retorted, my voice growing stronger with every word. Because I have recordings of phone conversations where Amanda specifically asks how long the sale process would take if I were to pass away in the next few months. Mr. Cole activated an audio device, and Amanda's voice filled the room. My mother has been very ill since my father's death. I don't think she'll last much longer. How long would the process take if she were to pass away in the coming months? The silence that followed was deafening. Amanda collapsed onto the sofa, covering her face with her hands. It's not what it sounds like, she whispered. I was just being practical. You're older, Mom, and after losing Dad. Practical? I interrupted her, feeling decades of motherly love turning into pure outrage. Bringing me to a place with no phone, no neighbors, no transportation, hoping I'll die of neglect is being practical? My voice rose to almost a shout. I am your mother, Amanda. I gave you life. I raised you. I worked 2 jobs to pay for your college. And I appreciate that, Mom. But Amanda began. But Mr. Cole cut her off. But you owe over $150,000 in credit cards, Mr. Cole said, showing more documents. You're 3 months behind on your mortgage, and Brian owes money to loan sharks who have sent threats. You needed that money from the sale of the mining rights, and you needed it fast. Brian straightened up defensively. Everyone has debt. That doesn't mean we wanted Mrs. Catherine to die. Really? Officer Garcia interjected, pulling out his own recorder. Because 10 minutes ago you were telling her it was best for her to stay here until nature took its course, knowing she is hours away from any medical help. Amanda lifted her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, but they no longer moved me. I had seen too much. I knew too much. Mom, please, you have to understand. We were desperate. Brian lost his job, and those people he owes money to, they threatened us. When we found out about the mine, we thought it was the answer to our problems. And your solution was to let me die? I asked, feeling each word come out like a slap. It didn't occur to you to ask me for help? To talk to me about the situation? To find a solution together? We knew you'd say no, Brian admitted, finally showing some honesty. You've never approved of our lifestyle, our spending. And Arthur always said we were irresponsible with money. Because you are, I exploded. But that doesn't justify trying to kill me. I turned to Amanda, searching her eyes for any trace of the little girl I had raised. Where is my daughter? Where is the little girl who cried when she heard a butterfly? When did you become this stranger? Amanda sobbed harder, but when she spoke, her words chilled me. When I realized I was never going to have the life I deserved by waiting for you and Dad to die naturally. You're 74, Mom. You could live another 20 years. And by then, it would be too late for us. Officer Morales cleared his throat. Miss Amanda, are you confessing that you brought your mother here with the intent of hastening her death to obtain an inheritance? The question hung in the air like a bomb about to detonate. Amanda looked at Brian, then at me, then at the officers. I could see the exact moment she realized there was no way out of this without admitting the truth. We didn't want her to suffer, she said finally, her voice barely audible. We just thought that if she felt very lonely and sad here, maybe her heart would just stop. Like when old people die of a broken heart after they lose their spouse. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing outside. Mr. Cole was the first to speak. Miss Amanda, you have just confessed to attempted homicide through negligence and endangerment of an at-risk adult. Amanda seemed to realize for the first time the real gravity of her words. No, wait, it wasn't like that. We just. But the words trailed off into incoherent stammers. Mrs. Catherine, Mr. Cole said to me gently, are you ready to hear your legal options? I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and profound sadness. Relief, because I finally had justice. Sadness, because the daughter I had loved for 45 years had died for me in this cabin, replaced by this greedy stranger who had just confessed to wanting my death. We have sufficient evidence to proceed with criminal charges, Mr. Cole continued. Elder abandonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and depending on the prosecutor's interpretation, possibly attempted homicide. He paused and looked directly at me. But we can also handle this civilly if you would prefer to keep this matter in the family. I looked at Amanda, who was watching me with pleading eyes, expecting my motherly love to save her one more time. But for the first time in decades, my answer was definite and clear. I want full justice, I said in a firm voice, criminal and civil. And I want Leo protected from these two forever. Officers Garcia and Morales stood up simultaneously, and the sound of metal handcuffs clicking shut echoed in the small cabin like a final sentence. Amanda screamed when Officer Garcia approached her, a sharp, desperate sound I had never heard come from her throat. No, please, Mom, you can't do this. I'm your daughter. Think of Leo. He needs his mother, she cried as the officer cuffed her hands behind her back. Her pleas pierced me like knives, but there was no turning back. You should have thought of Leo before you planned my death, I responded with a calmness that surprised myself. Now he'll be better off without you two as examples. The words came out cold and final, without the emotional tremor that had characterized my voice for weeks. Brian tried one last desperate maneuver. Mrs. Catherine, please, reconsider. Amanda is pregnant. Do you really want your grandchild to be born in jail? The lie was so obvious and pathetic that I almost wanted to laugh. Brian, Mr. Cole said in a professional tone, you've just added perjury and emotional manipulation to your charges. Medical exams will very quickly prove whether that statement is true or not. Brian paled, realizing he had made another stupid mistake. As the officers read Amanda and Brian their rights, I went to the secret room to bring more evidence. When I returned with the binders full of documents from the mining company, Amanda was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was a little girl and had broken my mother's favorite vase. It was the look of someone who finally understood that her actions had real consequences. The mining rights are worth $4 million, I told them, placing the documents on the table. $4 million you were willing to kill me for. Do you know what I'm going to do with that money? I paused dramatically, for the first time in weeks enjoying being in complete control of the situation. Half of it is going into an educational trust for Leo, which he will receive when he turns 21, provided he maintains good grades and stays away from you two. Amanda sobbed louder upon hearing this. The other half is going to organizations that protect senior citizens from family abuse. In honor of Arthur, who protected me even after his death. Mr. Cole pulled more documents from his briefcase. We have also prepared a restraining order that prohibits you from approaching Mrs. Catherine or contacting her in any way. And we have started the process for custody of Leo to pass temporarily to Brian's parents until the legal situation is resolved. "You can't take my son from me," Amanda screamed, struggling against the handcuffs. "He needs me. I'm his mother." "And I was your mother," I retorted, feeling decades of pain and disappointment crystallize in those words. "But that didn't stop you from planning my death. Why should it be any different for you?" The coldness in my own voice scared me a little, but it also gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in years. Officer Garcia spoke into his radio, confirming they had the suspects in custody and requesting an additional vehicle for transport. The reality of the situation began to finally sink into Brian's head, and he started crying silently while staring at the floor. "Mrs. Catherine," Officer Morales said to me, "we'll need you to come with us to the station to complete your formal statement. Mr. Cole says he can drive you there and back if you prefer not to stay in town tonight." "I'd prefer to stay in town," I replied immediately. This cabin is too full of bitter memories now. It was true. Despite having won, despite getting justice, I couldn't imagine sleeping another night in the place where I had discovered my own daughter's betrayal. Mr. Cole nodded in understanding. "I've already booked a room for you at the hotel in town. We can pack your things and leave whenever you're ready." His thoughtfulness reminded me why Arthur had trusted him so much. As I packed my few belongings, Amanda continued to shout from the living room. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We'll pay you back all the money. Brian will get a job. We can start over." Her desperate promises sounded hollow after everything I had heard. "Amanda," I said, stopping in the bedroom doorway, "you had 45 years to show me who you really were. The last 3 months showed me the truth." I paused, searching for the right words for what I knew would be my last direct words to her. "I'm not giving you another chance to hurt me, but I'm your only family," she cried, playing her last emotional card. "No," I replied with a clarity that surprised me. "You stopped being my family the moment you decided my death was more valuable than my life. Arthur was my family, and he protected me from the grave, from the person you became." When I walked out of the cabin for the last time, carrying my suitcase and followed by the lawyer, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, because Amanda's betrayal had left a wound that would probably never fully heal, but a deep peace in knowing I had taken control of my own life. The police vehicles drove away first, taking Amanda and Brian toward a future very different from the one they had planned. Amanda was still shouting from the back window, but her words were lost in the noise of the engine and the growing distance. "Do you regret anything, Mrs. Catherine?" the lawyer asked me as we drove toward town on the dusty road. I thought about his question for several minutes, watching the trees pass by the window. "I regret not seeing the signs sooner," I finally answered. "I regret giving her so many chances to hurt me. But I don't regret choosing justice over blind motherly love." "Arthur would be proud of you," the lawyer said softly. "Arthur knew this could happen," I replied, feeling a mix of gratitude and sadness for my late husband. "That's why he prepared everything so carefully. He knew me well enough to know that I would have chosen to protect Amanda, even at the cost of my own life, if he hadn't intervened." We reached the town just as the sun was beginning to set. It was a small, quiet place, with clean streets and people walking unhurriedly. After weeks of forced isolation, the simple sight of other human beings living their normal lives filled me with an unexpected emotion. "What now?" I asked, as the lawyer pulled the car up in front of the hotel. "Now," he said with a tired but satisfied smile, "you start a new life, a life where no one can manipulate you, abandon you, or plan your death for money." He paused and added, "And believe me, Mrs. Catherine, with $4 million and all the legal protection we're going to set up, that new life can be exactly whatever you want it to be." For the first time in months, I genuinely smiled. The hotel room was simple but clean, with a comfortable bed and a window overlooking the town's main square. After weeks of sleeping in the isolated cabin, the sound of human voices and light traffic was incredibly comforting. That first night, I slept deeply for the first time since Arthur's funeral. The next day, the lawyer arrived early with a full schedule of appointments. "We have a lot to do," he told me as we had breakfast at the hotel restaurant. "First, we're going to the police station to complete your statement, then to the bank to set up the new accounts, and this afternoon we have a meeting with the district attorney." The statement at the police station was a long and emotional process. I had to recount every detail of the past few weeks, from the moment Amanda convinced me to come to the cabin to the confession they had recorded the day before. The detective in charge of the case, an older man named Detective Harris, listened with attention and understanding. "Mrs. Catherine," the detective said when I finished my story, "I've seen many cases of elder abuse in my 30 years on the force, but I've never seen a plan as calculated and cold as this." He shook his head in disgust. What Amanda and Brian did wasn't just cruel, it was premeditated and planned for months. He showed me additional photographs they had obtained from the mining company, including emails where Amanda specifically asked about the timelines for completing the sale after my eventual passing. Reading those words written by my own daughter hurt more than hearing them in person. "What's going to happen to them now?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "They're facing serious charges," the detective explained. "First-degree elder abandonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and we're considering charges of attempted homicide by negligence. Amanda could get between 10 and 15 years in prison, Brian a little less for being an accomplice." He paused and added, "Of course, they can try to make a plea deal, but that would depend on whether you're willing to accept a reduced sentence." "No deals," I replied firmly. "I want them to face the full consequences of what they did." My words sounded harsher than I expected, but they were completely sincere. After the police station, we went to the main bank in town. Mr. Cole had arranged everything to transfer the mining rights to my exclusive name and to set up the necessary accounts to handle the future sale. The bank manager, a nervous man named Mr. Peterson, treated us with a deference that was clearly due to the amount of money involved. "Mrs. Catherine," he explained as we reviewed the documents, "with a property of this value, we strongly recommend you establish an irrevocable trust. This will protect you from any future attempts at financial manipulation and ensure your wishes are carried out exactly as you specify." Mr. Cole had already prepared the trust documents. $2 million would go directly into an educational account for Leo, which he would receive in annual payments starting at age 18, as long as he maintained a high-grade point average and had no contact with his parents. The other $2 million would be divided between elder abuse protection organizations and a personal account for my use for the rest of my life. "I also recommend we set up a very specific will," Mr. Cole added. "We want to ensure that if anything happens to you, Amanda and Brian cannot claim a single penny of your estate under any circumstances." The meeting with the district attorney was the most intense of the day. She was a stern woman named D.A. Reynolds, who had reviewed the entire case that morning. "Mrs. Catherine," she told me without preamble, "this is one of the clearest cases of elder abuse I have ever seen. The premeditation is obvious, the intent is clear, and we have recorded confessions. They are going to prison for a very long time." She explained that Amanda and Brian had tried that morning to hire a defense attorney, but their financial problems limited their options. Ironically, the DA added with a sarcastic smile, "The money they hope to get from your death is exactly what they would need to pay for a decent defense." "Have they asked for me?" I asked, though I wasn't sure why I cared. "Amanda has been asking to speak with you since last night," the DA replied. "She says she wants to apologize and explain her side of the story. Of course, we told her that's not going to happen. Any communication would have to be through lawyers. And honestly, I don't recommend you have any contact with her during the legal process." That afternoon, back at the hotel, I sat on the small balcony of my room and reflected on everything that had happened in less than 24 hours. My life had completely changed. I had more money than I had ever dreamed of, but I had lost my only daughter. I had justice, but I also had a deep pain that I knew would take years to heal. Mr. Cole knocked on my door around 6 in the evening. "There's something else we need to discuss," he said, sitting in the chair across from me. "Brian's parents, Susan and Richard, have been looking after Leo since yesterday. They want to meet with you to talk about the boy's future." The idea of seeing Leo filled me with conflicting emotions. He was my grandson, completely innocent in all this, but he was also the son of the woman who had tried to kill me. "What kind of people are Brian's parents?" I asked. "I researched them last night. Mr. Cole responded. Susan is a retired school teacher. Richard worked for 40 years as a mechanic. They have no criminal records, live modestly, and according to all reports, have been trying to keep Leo away from Brian's financial troubles for months. Does Leo know what happened? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. They told him his parents had to take an unexpected trip, Mr. Cole explained carefully. But he's a smart 8-year-old. He knows something is wrong. Susan says he's been asking about you constantly, asking if you're okay and when he can see you again. Those words broke my heart in a different way. Leo genuinely loved me, and I loved him. But how could I maintain a relationship with the son of the woman who had tried to kill me? How could I look him in the eye, knowing what his parents had done? Mr. Cole, I said after a long silence, do you think Leo can grow up to be different from his parents if he has the right influences? I think that boy has a chance to have a completely different life, he answered thoughtfully. With Susan and Richard raising him, with the educational fund you established, and with legal supervision to ensure Amanda and Brian cannot negatively influence him. Yes, I think he can be completely different. That night, as I listened to the quiet sounds of the town through my window, I made a decision that would change not only my future but Leo's as well. I was not going to let Amanda's betrayal destroy my relationship with my innocent grandson, but that relationship would have to be on my terms, with my rules, and with legal protections that would ensure I could never again be vulnerable to the kind of manipulation I had experienced. The meeting with Susan and Richard was scheduled for 10 in the morning at a quiet coffee shop in the center of town. I arrived 15 minutes early, nervous in a way I hadn't been since my first date with Arthur more than 50 years ago. Mr. Cole had insisted on accompanying me, for both emotional support and legal protection. Susan turned out to be a woman in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun and kind eyes that immediately reminded me of Arthur. Richard was taller, with the calloused hands of decades of manual labor and a serious but not hostile expression. Between them, holding Susan's hand, was Leo. My grandson saw me and immediately ran to me, hugging me with the full force of his 8 years. Grandma Catherine, Susan said you were sick. Are you better now? Why haven't you come to visit me? His questions came out in a rush, filled with the genuine concern only a child can express. I'm much better now, my love, I said, hugging him tightly as I fought back tears. It was impossible not to see Amanda in his features, but I also saw pure innocence in his eyes, something my daughter had lost a long time ago. Susan approached cautiously. Mrs. Catherine, I am so sorry for everything that has happened, she said in a soft but firm voice. Richard and I knew Brian and Amanda had money problems, but we never imagined this. Her voice broke slightly. We are ashamed and furious at what our son did. Richard nodded gravely. Brian wasn't raised to be like this, he said in a gruff voice. I don't know where we went wrong, but what he did is wrong, and Susan and I want you to know that we are completely on your side in this. We sat at a secluded table, with Leo between Susan and me. Mr. Cole took a seat beside me, documents ready, but discreetly tucked away. We need to talk about Leo's future, I began, looking directly at Susan and Richard. And we need to be completely honest about everything, including what his parents did. Susan sighed deeply. We've been debating what to tell him. He's very smart, and he already knows something serious is wrong. Last night he asked us if his parents were in trouble with the police. What did you tell him? I asked, carefully watching Leo's reaction. We told him the truth, adapted for his age, Richard answered, that his parents made some very bad choices that hurt people they love, and that now they have to face the consequences, and that no matter what happens to them, he will always be safe and loved. Leo looked at me with big, serious eyes. Grandma, did my parents hurt you? His direct question surprised me, but I decided to answer honestly. Yes, honey, they hurt me very much, I said, taking his small hand. But it wasn't your fault, and nothing that happened changes how much I love you. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad decisions, even when they love someone. Your parents hurt me, but that doesn't mean they don't love you. Susan intervened gently. Leo, remember when we talked about how actions have consequences? The boy nodded. Well, your parents are going to have to be away for a very long time because of the choices they made. But you're going to stay with Grandpa, Richard, and me, and you'll still see Grandma Catherine whenever she wants." "How long is a very long time?" Leo asked, with the typical insight of a smart child. Richard and Susan looked at me, waiting for my lead. "Probably many years," I answered honestly. "Maybe until you're a grown-up. But Leo, I want you to know something very important. You are not responsible for what your parents did, and you will always have people who love and take care of you." Mr. Cole cleared his throat softly. "If I may," he said, "there are some legal matters we need to discuss." He pulled out a thin folder. "Mrs. Catherine has established an educational trust for Leo. This will ensure he has funds for school, college, and a good start in his adult life." Susan looked surprised. "Mrs. Catherine, that's incredibly generous, but it's not necessary. Richard and I can provide for Leo with our pensions and savings." "I know," I replied, "but I want to do this. I want to make sure Leo has all the opportunities his parents threw away out of greed." I looked directly at my grandson. "But this money comes with responsibilities. You have to study hard, be a good person, and never ever hurt someone for money. Do you understand?" Leo nodded solemnly, though it was clear he didn't fully grasp the magnitude of what we were discussing. "Will I still get to see you, Grandma, even if my parents are in trouble?" That question broke my heart in the most beautiful way possible. "Of course, honey. I want to see you grow up. I want to be at your graduation. I want to meet your future wife, and I want my great-grandchildren to know who their great-grandmother is." Tears were streaming down my cheeks as I spoke. "But things are going to be different now. We're going to have to be very careful and follow a lot of rules to keep you safe." Mr. Cole then explained the legal terms of the custody. Susan and Richard would have full legal custody, with minimal supervision from social services. Amanda and Brian would have no visitation rights while in prison, and any future contact would be strictly supervised by the court. I would have extensive visitation rights, and the trust would be jointly managed by Mr. Cole and a trust bank. "There is one more condition," I added, looking seriously at Susan and Richard. "If Leo ever expresses a desire to see his parents when he's older, I will not interfere. But it has to be completely his decision, free from pressure from any side. And he has to fully understand what they did before he makes that decision." Susan nodded in understanding. "I think that's fair and wise," she said. "Richard and I would never speak ill of Amanda and Brian in front of Leo, but we won't lie about what they did if he asks." We spent the rest of the morning talking about lighter things. Leo told me about school, his friends, and a science project about volcanoes he was working on. For moments, I could forget the terrible circumstances that had brought us together and just enjoy being with my grandson. When it was time to say goodbye, Leo hugged me tightly. "Grandma, are you going to be okay living alone without Grandpa Arthur and without my parents?" His concern for me, after everything that had happened, showed me that this child had a pure heart worth protecting. "I'm going to be perfectly fine," I assured him. "In fact, I think I'm going to be better than I have been in a long time." And as I said those words, I realized they were completely true. That afternoon, back in my hotel room, I called Mr. Cole to finalize the last legal details. "Are you sure about all your decisions?" he asked. "Once we sign these documents tomorrow, it will be very difficult to change anything." "I am completely sure," I replied without hesitation. "For the first time in months, I know exactly what I want and how to protect what's important to me." 6 months later, I am sitting on the patio of my new house, a beautiful 2-bedroom property on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden I have planted and tended myself. The sound of bees buzzing among my red roses and the singing of birds accompany me as I write in my journal, a practice I began at the recommendation of the therapist Mr. Cole helped me find. The sale of the mining rights was completed 3 months ago. The mining company finally paid $4,200,000, a bit more than Arthur had estimated. Seeing that amount in my bank account was surreal. But what truly filled me with satisfaction was knowing that Amanda would never see a cent of that money. The trial ended last week. Amanda was sentenced to 12 years in prison for first-degree elder abandonment, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted homicide by negligence. Brian received 8 years as an accomplice. Their lawyers tried to argue that they had acted out of financial desperation, but the recordings of their confessions and the evidence of premeditation were too compelling. The most satisfying moment of the trial was when the judge read the sentence. In my 30 years on this bench, he said in a stern voice, I have rarely seen a case of family betrayal so calculated and cold. Elder abuse is a despicable crime, but when it is perpetrated by the victim's own children, it represents a fundamental violation of the most sacred family bonds. Amanda cried throughout the reading, but her tears no longer affected me. Leo comes to visit me every Sunday. Susan and Richard have turned out to be extraordinary guardians, and my grandson is flourishing under their care. His grades have improved, he's made new friends, and he's learning to play the piano with a teacher I found for him. Most importantly, he is developing a solid sense of right and wrong, something his parents clearly never taught him. Grandma, he said to me last Sunday, as we were planting sunflower seeds in my garden, do you think I'll ever be able to forgive my parents for what they did to you? His question surprised me with its emotional maturity. Forgiveness is a very personal decision, honey, I replied, choosing my words carefully. You don't have to forgive them to be happy, and you don't have to hate them to protect yourself. The important thing is that you grow up to be a good and fair person, no matter what they did. I paused and added, and remember, forgiveness doesn't mean you have to let someone hurt you again. Susan told me that Leo occasionally asks about his parents, but has never expressed a desire to visit them in prison. I think he understands, in his own way, that what they did was unforgivable, she told me. And frankly, he's much more stable and happy now than when he was living with them and all their financial stress. My new daily routine has brought me a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. I wake up early, make coffee in my sunny kitchen, and go out to tend my garden. In the afternoons, I read books I had always wanted to read, but never had the time for. And in the evenings, I sometimes walk through town, greeting the neighbors who have gradually become friends. Mrs. Grace, who lives next door, has become especially close. She is also a widow, and we share stories about our late husbands while having tea in the afternoons. She knows my whole story, and her understanding and support have been invaluable during the most difficult parts of this process. Don't you feel lonely without family nearby? She asked me a few weeks ago. Grace, I replied. I learned that being alone is better than being surrounded by people who want you dead. And besides, Leo is all the family I need now. It was completely true. The quality of my relationships had improved dramatically since I removed the toxic people from my life. I have used some of the money in ways that would have infuriated Amanda. I donated $500,000 to a shelter for battered women, another $300,000 to an organization that protects seniors from family abuse, and $100,000 to Leo's school to improve their music and arts programs. Each donation bears a small plaque that reads, "In memory of Arthur, who protected his wife even after death. Mr. Cole has become more than just my lawyer. He has become a genuine friend and advisor. We have lunch together once a week, and he keeps me informed of any legal developments related to the case. Do you know what's most ironic about all this?" he asked me during our most recent lunch. What's that? I asked, though I had an idea where the conversation was going. Amanda and Brian would have received a substantial inheritance eventually if they had simply been patient and loving, he explained. Arthur had a will that would have left them a good amount of money, but their greed and impatience led them to lose absolutely everything, and on top of that, they ended up in prison. It's true. The irony has not been lost on me. If Amanda had just been a loving, patient daughter, she probably would have inherited $1 million when I died naturally in 10 or 20 years. Instead, her attempt to hasten my death to get $4 million resulted in her losing everything and completely ruining her life. But what satisfies me most is not her punishment, but my own transformation. The woman I was 6 months ago, vulnerable and manipulable, has completely disappeared. In her place is a strong, independent, and protected woman who will never again allow someone to abuse her kindness. Last night, as I looked at the stars from my patio, I thought about Arthur and how he would have reacted to all this. I believe he would be proud of the decisions I made, the strength I found, and especially how I protected Leo from the consequences of his parents' actions. "Thank you, my love," I whispered to the night sky, "for protecting me even when you were no longer here to do it in person." This morning, I received a letter from Amanda from prison, the first communication she has tried to make with me since the trial. Mr. 2. Cole advised me not to open it, that whatever she had to say could be manipulative or disturbing. But after thinking carefully, I decided to read it. The letter was exactly what I expected: pleas, excuses, attempts to downplay what she had done, and requests for forgiveness. "I know I made terrible mistakes," she wrote, "but I am still your daughter, and I hope one day you can find it in your heart to forgive me." After reading it, I walked to the fireplace in my living room and burned it. I watched as Amanda's words turned to ash, and I felt a deep peace, not because I had forgiven her, but because I had finally and completely accepted that the daughter I had loved no longer existed, and probably never really had. Tomorrow is Leo's 9th birthday, and we have planned a small party in my garden with Susan, Richard, Grace, and some of his school friends. It will be the first family celebration I've had since Arthur's death, but it will be genuine and filled with real love, not the fake, manipulative love that had characterized my last years with Amanda. In the end, Amanda got what she wanted. I am living a completely new life, far from my past, in a beautiful and peaceful place. But this new life is not the result of my death, as she had planned. It is the result of my rebirth as a strong, protected woman, finally free from the people who pretended to love me while planning my destruction. And for the first time in decades, I am completely happy